Hello, everybody. Welcome to APL Readers Corner. If this is the first time you're joining us here at the Aurora Public Library, my name is Tessie, and here's Elizabeth, and we're going to be discussing a book from a different genre every month. That's what we do with the Readers Corner is we pick a genre, and then we pick a book from that genre and kind of see how it matches up, and then whether we like it or dislike it. All of our books are available through our ebook portal, so either on Overdrive or Hoopla, so you can check out these books right away if you are listening and you think the book sounds really interesting. This month we have read Gideon the Knight. I want to say Tamsyn Muir, if I'm pronouncing her name right, is the author.
So,
yeah. How do you pronounce her name, Elizabeth?
I've been mentally saying it more, but I have no idea, and I should probably have looked up a pronunciation guide. But sure, Tamsyn Muir.
Yeah. Well, in any case, Gideon the Ninth, and so, and then, so with this particular book, we kind of picked the sci-fi genre, and so we're going off sci-fi. This book is really interesting because it's sort of a mashup of different genres, which we'll get to a little bit later. But we ended up picking sci-fi, which I think we've done before for Readers Corner, but we decided to do it again because sci-fi is such a vast genre with so many different elements. And then we picked this book. So this book in particular, a good summary that Elizabeth wrote, which I thought was really fun, is that it's basically about lesbian necromancers that participate in a deadly puzzle competition in a haunted Gothic space palace to win immortality. So we have a lot of all of those elements thrown into one book. So it's a bit of a wild ride, but it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun reading this book. The author, Tamsyn Muir, she's an Australian writer, and this is her debut trilogy. And so I think this is a really good start off to her writing career. I want to say this book was really well written, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more later. Gideon the Ninth has a sequel called Harrow the Ninth. That's going to be really interesting to read. So it's already like the trilogy is already getting started. The third book is going to come out sometime in the future, and apparently everybody is waiting with bated breath to read that one.
And it's called Electo the Ninth. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's not even a character I've seen yet. So that's going to be really. And let's see. She also has about 5 more books contracted after this. So this is an author I think that we're going to see a lot of, and a lot of her books tend to be genre mashups. And so we have possibilities of a cyberpunk gunslingers under the sea, which sounds really fun, a post-apocalyptic King Arthur, Princess Floralinder. So a bunch of these different mashup genres. So I think that's just the style of her writing that you see very clearly with Gideon the Knight.
Definitely. And because it's a mashup, people have very mixed opinions about this book, which is fair. So basically, Gideon the Ninth is fabulous because it takes sci-fi and it's like, but what if memes? And what if more genres? And it does both, which means the ratings on Amazon and Goodreads and Hoopla are all pretty consistently high, but the reviews themselves are all over the board. So Amazon, it has 1,866 ratings for a total of average of 4.5 stars. So the top review is 5 out of 5, my favorite book of 2019. It's what I've been waiting my whole reading life for, says Melanie. Meanwhile, we have the most negative review on that page, addresses it as weird skirting around enslavement and slavery due to the dynamics between the necromancers and the Cavaliers, which we can talk about. And then the sort of middle of the road one was just understand that this is a romance mystery thriller sort of thing, much more 10 Little Indians meets Jane Eyre in space with skeletons than Dune. And that one was a 3-star review. The most popular review from outside the US said it's got everything. Lesbian necromancers, a giant labyrinthine, crumbling, possibly haunted, definitely deadly house by the sea, sword fights, murder, blood, skeletons, locked rooms which should definitely stay locked, mysterious mystics, battling houses, daring cavaliers, and a Cluedo-esque whodunit running throughout. And that would be Dave Graham. On Goodreads, A lot of the reviews were cross-posted. So we've got some people who said that the first half was slow and the second half picked up. Some people who really enjoyed Gideon, but found the plot confusing for the first little bit and just stuck with it for Gideon and Gideon's voice. And one review just said, this book is a lot. And it's fun looking at these to see genre, because we said it was sci-fi mashup. So here's the genres that people have said it is. You already heard romance, mystery, thriller. 10 Little Indians meets Jane Eyre in space with skeletons. That would be, what is it? Regency romance, mystery. Cluedo Ask Whodunit for another mystery. This one review says genre mashup made of space opera, murder mystery, horror, and whatever the literary term is for where it's like a magic and science-based scavenger hunt at the Olympics, but where some people are expected to die. So if you're thinking Hunger Games, like just mentally transpose Hunger Games, add some puzzles. And I feel like that's almost a genre at this point, or the puzzle box books. So I don't know, if we want to break it down to just sci-fi, we can. This definitely feels like genre soup. Like, let's throw it in and see what happens. And what happens is it goes bang, which is always fun.
Yeah, I think the setting itself, which is that it is in space and it takes place on planets, or at least they're mentioned, and there's some like sci-fi elements to it, is why like you would say, oh, the first genre in that long list of genres is sci-fi. But then it starts kind of branching out. But generally sci-fi, if you want to think about, or when people think about sci-fi, it's usually in the future, it's usually in space, there are spaceships, there's a difference between hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi. So with the hard sci-fi, the authors are very particular about making it as believable as possible. Like they put in that technology, they want to make that technology as believable as possible. They usually have pages and pages of writing about how this black hole energy works with the spaceship to keep it moving. And so myself in particular, I really enjoy that. A lot of people don't, just because it's like really hard to get through sometimes. Soft sci-fi, you usually have these sci-fi elements thrown in, not really explained, sort of like Star Wars, where you have these lightsabers, but nobody really knows how they work, but they're there, and they're spacey, and they're cool. So I want to say this tends more towards the soft sci-fi, but maybe they explain it later in some of the other books. I
feel like this goes past soft sci-fi and ends up with jello sci-fi. Like if you poke it for an explanation, it just bounces at you and you're like, okay, that's fair, never mind. Because when we covered our previous sci-fi book, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, that one we classified as soft, didn't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Like, and that one was soft-ish.
Softish, yeah. It was kind of like in the middle. It wasn't quite as like hard sci-fi as I've seen, but it did try and take some of the elements and explain it a little bit, but a lot of it was just sort of like, this is how it is.
Mm-hmm. But it did try to add some science.
Some science. The science parts are great.
This one touched on necromancy.
Yeah. Before we get too deep into the actual book, just know that this is a spoiler realm. We're going to be talking about basically spoilers start happening by Act 2, which is near the very beginning of the book, where people die and things happen, and then by the end there's like big reveals. So we're going to be talking about the entire book. So if you haven't read the book, maybe log off, read the book, and then come back to hear what we have to say about it. But from now on, we're going to be adding a lot of spoilers in here. So if you don't like spoilers, beware.
Absolutely. So yes, beware spoilers. Okay, so likes about this book. You mentioned before that it was really well written for a debut. And I want to say that the Tor.com review and a lot of the other reviews I saw talked about how much this book just loves language. It is nuts about language. Like it makes language feel like a playground with the way it constructs its sentences. It's just going for the maximum impact with each one. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was one of my more favorite elements of the book. At first, I was like a little confused because you have these times where the language and the voice is very formal, like especially when they're still at the ninth planet, the Tomb planet. where it's like they're going through these rituals and some of like what they're talking about is really formal, and then you have Gideon here in the background just being like whoosh, saying very modern. So it's stuff like if you're just going on the internet and you're like looking at people talking, like that's sometimes what Gideon sounds like.
That is almost entirely what Gideon sounds like.
So like that kind of duality of language was really fun to read after you get used to it. And then I think it brought a kind of freshness to when you're reading. So like you have sort of like a traditional, like not really traditional. I don't want to put the word traditional to this book because it's completely wrong, but you have like a regular novel and then you have Gideon just throwing in this modern voice and you're just like, wow, like it was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun. I think that was one of the factors why so many people latched on to Gideon as well. So there's when Gideon arrives on this grand puzzle planet, and there's all of the different houses. Harrowhark, who is the necromancer to her Cavalier, is like, don't say things. Just don't talk. Please don't speak. So everyone assumes that Gideon took a vow of silence for a lot of the book. And then finally, when Gideon starts talking, one of the characters is like, you don't sound how I thought you'd sound. Because everyone else is just talking like a normal character in a normal book. And Gideon is over here just like, nope, we are the most casually irreverent out of the entire cast.
And it makes her so easy to relate to. So it's like if you yourself was like thrown into that situation, like some of the things that she's thinking, you would be like, yeah, I'm thinking those things.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you would want to be thrown into that situation, because a puzzle murder planet is not my idea of a good time.
No, it would make a terrible vacation. I wouldn't enjoy that very much.
Yeah. Let's see, let's talk a little bit more about the puzzle element of the book. Like you mentioned earlier that basically Hunger Game-esque books are their own genre nowadays, like sort of like that genre where you have a group of people, they have to do a bunch of puzzles and there's like a survival fight for their life. So it starts off really early when some of the characters start getting murdered.
The puzzles are presented before that with this ominous overtone where they're just basically told there's only one rule. Like, and the rule isn't anything about murder or thievery or anything like that. The rule is just don't go into a door without permission. And that is the only rule in the entire place. So that's interesting. And then it starts to, like you said, accelerate with the murder. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, there are consequences. There's stuff going on here. I thought it was interesting compared to some of the other murdery games. So you have like games like the Hunger Games where murder is expected. And then you have, what's another example? Maze Runner, I guess, where they're just sort of tossed into the maze. And it's like, what is going on here? We have no idea on the scale. And this one, they know what they're there to accomplish, but they don't really know how to accomplish it. And they're allowed to sort of come up with their own methods, even if those methods are unethical. And so that ends with two of the nicest characters getting murdered right off the bat, which was miserable, and I hated it.
I was very sad about that. And I was like, oh, we're starting this now, aren't we? And it's like, when you're reading the book, you could, like, there's this point in time where they're like going through the puzzles and they're trying to figure things out, and you're kind of waiting to see if it's going to veer in that direction where people start getting killed. And when finally someone gets killed, you're like, oh no. But I thought it was really interesting that, like, sometimes those situations where you have these books and you put a group of people and kind of see what they do, where it's not written that they have to start murdering people like the Hunger Games, but it's just like, oh, let's see what they do with their group dynamics. Yeah, if we hadn't had that character who had started all of the murdering, I feel like maybe things wouldn't have veered off in that direction, especially because the character teacher who was there at that abandoned space station where they were supposed to figure out these puzzles, like, it seemed like he was upset when things started turning violent. And so I don't think it was like one of those things where, you guys are supposed to kill each other for these keys and unlock these puzzles for these keys to reach immortality. And then I thought it was really interesting that at the end of the book, when you finally get to meet the Emperor, he mentioned really briefly that the whole, I don't want to say game, but the whole trial was a chance for them to come to terms with what it takes to reach that immortality level. So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, let's murder each other until just one of us is standing, even though that's what kind of ended up happening, sort of.
It's really interesting. I don't want to absolve Teacher and the Emperor of their blame in this story, because what you have is you have this 10,000-year-old story of an emperor and his 8 guards. 16 go in, 8 leave. Nobody knows what happened in the building. And then you have their pushback into the situation, and they're like, you figure it out, by all means. And so they're all entering this with the knowledge that only half of the previous group made it out alive, and there are 17 of them. So when people start to get murdered, they're like, maybe this is what happened before, even though it very much is not what happened to the previous group. And oh my goodness. I also appreciate that, kind of like with the Hunger Games, fighting each other isn't the way to go. So you've got our 2 main characters, the Necromancer and the Cavalier, which I would like to talk about that dynamic right after this. But we've got Harrow, the Necromancer of the 9th house, which the 9th house is the quiet house, the house of the creepy nuns. So Harrow, Necromancer of creepy nuns, and Gideon, sword fighter of the creepy nuns, who really does not want to be a creepy nun. And so Harrow is down there like exploring, getting super competitive. We're running out of time. It has to be us first. And she isn't wrong that there is that competition to be the first, that there is very real consequences if you're not the first one to solve a puzzle. Meanwhile, Gideon's up there like eating mashed potatoes in complete silence and making friends despite the fact that she's eating mashed potatoes in complete silence. So when murders start happening, Gideon's the one who starts getting reached out to by the other members of the group who are like, hello, so-and-so liked you, so you need to know this information. Just you, though. Like, I called you. You can tell your necromancer if you want. I don't actually care about her. I've never met her. And Gideon's like, ah, yes. Finally, someone appreciates me. Now I'm going to go tell Harrow immediately.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
It's also interesting because everyone else besides the 9th house is friends.
No, that I did find that interesting. They all knew each other
Before they went in. So there's like, you don't figure that out right away, but there's all these lines later on about, I don't regret pushing her into a cake when we were 8. Like, oh my goodness, why are we babysitting them again? That kind of thing, back and forth all over the place. Like an unfulfilled romance happening in this corner. A couple of teens wanting to admire other people in this corner. And it's interesting because all of them know each other, but because we're seeing from the perspective of the outsiders, we don't until later on. And we're like, oh, so we're the creepy outcasts, good to know. And everyone else, we're not the ones doing the killing. So someone who's doing the killing presumably knows everyone else already and is killing their friends. So.
Yeah, I didn't really catch on to that until later. Well, not that the author really wants you to, but I am excited to see in the next book if she kind of expands upon, like, because you would get tidbits because there's 9 houses and each house has like a special area of necromancy that they excel in, and it's sort of like personality traits per se, like basically a tradition of how they are brought up. And I thought it was really interesting because in the books you would get bits and pieces to it. I think after I finished the book, it's like when I would have like, that's when I was kind of like looking through like, oh, this house is like, this is all that we figured out in this one book about them, and they put it really nicely in like a little picture format. But while you're reading it, you don't know off the bat. So I thought that was really cool.
That is fun. It's very much a trail of breadcrumbs, I guess, kind of thing, where it's like, hello, here's one clue. Please enjoy it. Here's another clue. I also very much enjoy that we have, as one of our Facebook discussion questions, which house in this book are you? Like, it is now a goth queer sorting hat. Congratulations. Which house are you in Gideon the Ninth? So that is always fun. But yeah, Cavaliers and Necromancers, let's talk about them a little bit, because it's a really interesting dynamic, especially since Gideon's a fake. So at the beginning of the book, the House of the Ninth, everybody has like their heir, who is the necromancer, like the heir to whatever throne. And then they have the Cavalier, who's their bodyguard from life till death kind of thing. And the Cavalier of the ninth house flies the coop, is not interested, was a poet anyway, does not want to be here, was a very bad poet anyway. So he leaves, and all of a sudden Harrow's over there talking to her mortal enemy Gideon, like, all right, you are going to be my Cavalier. In exchange, I will give you your freedom after this. But it's a very interesting little dynamic in the first place, and probably worth talking about, because there's this whole idea that Gideon was a giant loophole in the first place, that when a baby got dumped on Skeleton Nun Planet, everyone was like, how do we deal with a baby? I know. We make it so that she's in debt to our house. That makes perfect total sense. And so that's a weird dynamic going in, that just no one in Skeleton Nun House thought to rethink this rule. And now we've got the Cavalier Necromancer bond, which is not servant master or whatever. I do disagree with that part of that particular review. I think it's interesting because Gideon was a servant of the house for so long. But in Gideon's defense there, like, there is clearly more going on than the house was aware of regarding Gideon. And certain characters on the main cast are like, oh, cool, you're the interesting one of this dynamic, actually. Like, you're the one with the power in this story. I don't know. I found it interesting. What did you think of Cavaliers and Necromancers?
I feel like because at the beginning, Gideon doesn't take it very seriously, I didn't take it very seriously. And so by the end of the book, when it becomes like a very important element to the plot, by that point, I had slowly gotten bits and pieces from the other Cavalier and Necromancer pairs, like to see that they had such strong bonds with each other. And I'm like, maybe it isn't just like, because at first I was like, oh, it's just like a title where you have this pair of people, and they're just like, they just work together. It's not a big deal. But later you kind of see how it's really something to take seriously, especially when Gideon finds out there was an oath to go along with it. And I think like it kind of mirrored the progression of her and Harrow's relationship. Sort of like at the beginning, you don't take it seriously, they hate each other. Like I started this book and I wanted to text you and be like, are they supposed to be friends by the end of this?
I hate this.
It was like, I don't see how that could go from one end to the other end of the spectrum. But and like I was like, oh, are they supposed to be like the pairing of this lesbian necromancer book? Which I guess we can talk about in a little bit, but it sort of yes or no. But it's like as their relationship develops, you get to see a little bit more of what being a necromancer and a cavalier together mean, until it becomes like one of the most important elements of the book.
Yeah, it's okay. So we are playing in spoiler territory, right? Spoiler, spoiler, spoiler.
I wasn't sure because that's such a big spoiler.
Okay, yeah, I know. I've been hesitant to talk about it because it's such a big spoiler. So giant capital letters, spoiler. If you do not want this spoiler, go listen to the reading video from Wednesday where I read the first chapter and then read the book and then come back. Okay, so Cavalier and Necromancer bond should have been a big tip-off to everybody in that room who the villain was. That should have been giant neon letters, because every Cavalier Necromancer pair, once people start getting killed off, if a Cavalier or a Necromancer is killed without the other, they've basically been raised with each other and paired with each other for years, sometimes since birth, and they lose it because they've made this vow that like they're going to die at the same time, and then one of them dies without the other, and they get miserable and they get sad about it, and they like are going to defend each other to the death kind of thing. Like there's one Necromancer who outlives the Cavalier and is just like, no one should ever outlive their partner like that. No one should. And then you have one specific character whose Cavalier's been dead the whole time and is just like, welp, it be like that sometimes. And no one is like, wow, that's suspiciously villainous that you don't care about your Cavalier. How long have you been friends with your Cavalier exactly? No one asks.
I didn't ask until
I didn't ask either. It was the reread that got me, because they reveal a lot of that stuff after that attack. And so I'm reading on as somebody returning to the book, and I'm like, wow, that was really blatant. That was giant neon letters blatant that she didn't care about her Cavalier. Oh my gosh. And that helps explain some of Harrow's suspicions. So we're playing in spoiler territory. This particular character, Dulcinea, is an imposter. And Harrow throughout the book is like, don't trust her. Don't like that one. No, thank you. And Gideon's like, well, you probably don't like her because of my giant crush on her. This would make sense. And I'm like, reading it, this would make sense. Dulcinea is amazing. You are a sad little scrap. I understand why you are jealous. And now I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, she didn't care at all about her Cavalier. You got paired with your Cavalier a couple months ago and are already ride or die and are suspicious. This is actually quite reasonable of you.
Yeah. Now that you're pointing it out, I'm like, yeah, I was pretty sure she was jealous anyways, and it's probably still true, but
I think that's the biggest part of the element, is that she's jealous and she's like, I don't trust her. And Gideon's like, you don't. Yeah, I'm sure you don't.
Like one of those big fights, I think it was their last big fight where Gideon was like, oh, like, just let me go and I'll go be Dulcinea's Cavalier. And I was like,
ouch.
Like,
I'd rather serve a dead Dulcinea than the living heir of the Ninth. And I'm like, yikes. All right, we're fighting. Okay.
that one's serious.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because let's actually talk about the Harrow Gideon thing, because it kind of is the romance of the story, but I don't think it really is the romance of the story necessarily, in the sense that I looked up an interview with Tamsyn Muir that's just like, she just basically says she wanted to write a story where anyone could end up with anyone at any point. Which, no one on earth wants to end up with Silas Octokitzeron. Nobody does. Not Silas. Spare us, please. However, many other pairings exist and are possible. So I think during the course of the book, I shipped Gideon with 3 different people. There were 3 really obvious neon ships that you could go with. And there's, of course, other ships in there. I think for Gideon, there's Harrow, who is one of the strongest relationships in the story. And I don't think necessarily a romantic one. It is, but like, it's also deeply unhealthy. And I think that's the point. Then you have Dulcinea, who's just like, let me swoon into your arms my first time on page and flatter you a bunch. And I'm like, heck yes. And then it's like, wait, villain, no. All right. And then there's Corona Beth, who is interesting as well. So how about you?
Yeah, no, I could see all 3 of those. I definitely think the Gideon-Harrow relationship was, if it was veering towards romantic, I feel like it would be very unhealthy for them. I feel like they should, if it wanted to go in that direction, they should learn how to be friends and trust each other more before they go in that direction.
Little bit, yeah.
And then with Dulcinea, like, at first I was like, oh, she's just like a fluffy, frill-wearing powder puff who's sick. And then I was like, oh, she's nice. And then I think at the point where you find out that she has some keys, and that is when I was like, nope.
Yeah. How did you get keys?
Yeah. And so after that, I was pretty sure that she was manipulating Gideon. And so at that point, every time they interacted, I was like, no, don't fall for it. And I feel like
you're being played.
Corona was a very interesting character, because at first, like the way she was described, I was like, I get it why Gideon's like, oh, I have a crush on her. I didn't think that it would go anywhere, just because it feels like it was just like, oh, I like this person from afar.
One off. Like, she's gorgeous. Yeah. There we go.
Not relationship material sort of thing. By the end, where you see, like, you learn her secret, where she's not, spoiler, actually.
She's not a necromancer or a Cavalier. She is neither.
No. She is just like working the room with the power of her personality, which is pretty good. I feel like if she wasn't in the situation she was in, she'd be very successful in life. And so that was really interesting. And then at the end, where she was very upset that her sister didn't choose her to help her ascend to immortality, I was like, yeah, she has some issues. So
you also need therapy. All of you, therapy.
All of them. It's like you slowly get, like, at the beginning, they all look like they're all put together and know what they're doing. And then Harrow and Gideon are like, no, we don't know what we're doing. And then by the end, you find out that everybody was like, no, we don't know what we're doing. So
Yeah,
I feel like that's reflective of real life.
it is. There's a scene partway on where like Gideon is telling tragic backstory time to Palamedes, and he's like, so you know this wasn't your fault and there's no reason for you to hate yourself. She's like, I didn't say I hated myself. He's like, okay. Yeah, nope, I'm good at evidence. Sorry, don't hate yourself, okay, kid? Like, I would say possibly the only ones who don't need therapy are Palamedes and Camilla, the sixth house, the librarians. I love them.
It's a good reflection on it. No,
It
yeah, I
is.
agree with you. They seem like although Palamedes had his unrequited romance.
Had his heart broken into tiny little pieces and then crushed. Yes.
Yeah. So that was like, he looked like he was all put together except for that little bit.
Yeah.
Which he sacrificed himself.
If they'd communicated, this would have been useful. If at any point they'd had a conversation about, all right, so like, how do you know Dulcinea? Exactly. How about you? Then I feel like they could have put together some dots there of, oh, no, she doesn't act at all like that person in your letters. And that would have been useful to both of them. Perhaps, maybe.
We would have gotten killed a lot sooner, though.
That's true. I feel like the main theme of the book was like these enmeshed relationships that aren't necessarily healthy, but are still like deeply essential to the characters. So you have, and that the Cavalier necromancer pairing pairs well into that. So you've got Harrow and Gideon, who are like bound by being the only people their age in the entire planet, and also bound by this hugely tragic circumstance. Then you have Ianthe, Coronabeth, and Naberius, who are bound by this gigantic lie. And so that is bringing them together, and like, it looks like Coronabeth is the one large and in charge, and she is not. She is entirely at their mercy. You've got the eighth house, who is a boy in his battery, as uncomfortable as that is, until his uncle stands up to him. And I was like, yes, good. I'm sorry you're about to die. And seventh house, where it was never a living person at all helping out there. I don't know. So it's all over the map. And then you have like normal, well-adjusted people who cannot be allowed to live. Like the terrible teens who I loved.
Yeah, they were sad. That was sad. Why were they even killed off?
I know that was a question that was asked by Palamedes, asked it in the last act. And I know they explained why the fifth house. I think, if I remember right, it was because the fourth house was too snoopy and had been following everyone. But I don't remember entirely why that might have been. I should double check on that and see what the deal was there. But I loved them. They were very good. They did not deserve it.
They were cute. I was interested by the second house. They kind of went out with a bang too.
They did.
It was sort of a misdirected bang.
Yeah. The cops over there in the corner going, we shouldn't be doing a murder. And everyone else is like, it's too late. We don't trust you. We're not giving you keys. They're like, all right, we'll go do a murder, and then none of you can do murders. And it's like, well, that's one way to handle conflict. All right. So I don't know. I liked them. They were definitely in the background. I'm curious, based on some of the breadcrumbs and clues we saw, that the previous Gideon, whoever that was 10,000 years ago, had been associated with the second house. I'm curious to see if that means the second house comes to the forefront more in later books as we figure out what happened with Gideon and why Gideon is mentioned in 10,000-year-old letters.
No, that'll be really interesting. Which brings me to a point that I wanted to bring up, which is like, what is going on with the Emperor? Like, what is, like, while I was reading this book, and maybe it's me trying to like find more than the soft sci-fi wants to reveal, but so you have these 9 planets, and each of these planets have a different group of people that serve the emperor revolving around this star. And some of the planets are super close to the star, and so they have to have ways that they can deal with that. I want to say the 6th house is really close to the star because there's a brief mention that they had their library with no windows because they were trying to regulate the heating so the books don't fall apart, which I thought was fun. So you have these 9 planets, and then I thought it was really, when I first started this book with the view that it was a sci-fi, and you get to this 9th planet and there's basically nobody on it, and I'm like, where are all the people, right? And then you hear bits and pieces. So you have the 2nd house and you have this 4th house that are basically battle necromancers with their cavaliers, like the army part of this society that are going out
on the cops.
But who are they fighting? Like, why do you have these houses with some of these houses? Like, maybe the 9th house can be explained. Near the end, you sort of learn that they weren't supposed to be a house and they're just there to guard the tomb.
Right, and they were all supposed to die.
Yeah. But it sounds like with the 7th house, because there was a brief mention that they didn't really have anybody else to take Dulcinea's place, the real one. And so maybe they're having the same sort of problems as the 9th house. But I was like, where are all the people? And it's like, why do they have a system that they do? And who are they fighting? Then you have this emperor that you meet at the very end of the book. And he meets Harrow and he's like, oh, there's this big conflict that we're having and I am losing, so I need your help. And Harrow's like, okay. I think she's just saying that just so she can kind of get the lay of the land, not necessarily that she believes him, but...
I don't even know if Harrow's like conscious enough to make a choice at that point. I definitely thought she was in shock when she made that decision. I was just like, okay, I no longer trust the Emperor if you're going to play these cards right now, right this exact moment. You are no longer trustworthy. But it's interesting because I didn't think of who they were fighting, but that's a good point. You have houses 2 and 4 who are clearly fighting someone. You have house 3, which is clearly still rich and decadent and opulent. You have the historian house 5 and the librarian house 6, who are both doing a great job. Then you have 7 and 9 who are dying. And then you have 8 who I hope was dying, but I don't think they're actually dying. They seem to have a system in place.
A system of batteries.
I hate that. Hate that a lot.
I was like, once I found out, I'm like,
But yeah. I'm curious if later books will reveal who on earth they're at war with, because the Emperor's claim is that he's been off fighting things that are giant, bigger menaces than anything they can face, which means that he has not been fighting in this war. He's been playing with, like, the abominations from the abyss this whole time. So what is threatening this world? Also, I thought that the 9th house was Pluto.
Fair.
Because I don't know if that's actually true, but it's got Earth parallels when they land on the 1st. Like it's got the little hangovers from Earth possibly. And then you've got, and I don't think it was on Earth. I think it was a satellite of some kind, maybe, if I remember right. But then you've got Pluto where it's like, okay, here's this dead barren planet all the way out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, all right, and it's number 9, huh? So we're Team Pluto as a planet in this house, I see. Okay. So, I don't know.
That's
I
didn't make that connection. I was just like, ooh, planet in space.
Fair.
But no, that would be interesting to see, especially just because it is a futuristic book. If it's going back to be like, oh, this was once the solar system that we are living in right now, and then it changed. How? That's a good point to think about.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it correlates. It might not. But Mars is the war planet, right? And it's the 4th as well. So that might have been why I didn't pick up on it with the teams, because I was just like, oh yeah, they're from Mars. Of course they're fighting. And then I just didn't mentally compute who they were fighting against.
That's fair.
But clearly there are mysteries in this book. Everything I've heard about the 2nd book says that it is even more confusing than this one, which I am impressed. And I started it, and without any spoilers regarding the first chapters, they are correct. I am confused. I am very confused with this entire thing.
like when I was reading Gideon the Ninth, when I started it, I was confused. But I want to say for anybody who wants to read this book that you just power through the confusion and it starts making sense.
Once you get to the murders, then it starts to sort of click together. So there's a lot of world building set up. If you're going into the book and you're just like, what is happening? And also, if you hung around, then you must not mind spoilers too terribly much, so you have some background. But yes, if you're heading in, what is happening then? And just know that we've got the little outcast planet coming to play with all the friendos before people get killed. I feel like my explanation just then was worse than just reading the book and entering it. But you know what? Whatever. We will move on. Did you have anything you disliked about the book? Because I do agree that it was a slow starter. That was my hesitation with it. And I'm still not on board the Harrow Gideon boat. Like I am in the sense that now they really care about each other, and I'm not in the sense that it's toxic and they should get some space. So those were my two things.
Yeah, I want to say that I'm also not a fan of Gideon Harrow pairing. Like I mentioned before, I think they need some time to work out their issues before it ever goes into any sort of romantic
Therapy time.
Classes. And I wasn't happy with the ending, but major spoiler. Well, I don't know. I don't want to say the spoiler just in case. But I wasn't happy with the ending, but there are hints that maybe that the ending is not what we think it is. So that gives me some hope.
I am very team the ending is not what we think. I feel like there were enough breadcrumbs, especially rereading, where I'm like, nope, that's not what it looked like. I do not care. The Emperor is wrong. I don't care. I will fight for this. Like, you do not do this to me right now. So I'm pretty sure that, yeah, that would be.
Yeah, but otherwise, I really like this book. I think the beginning, even if some people saw it as like a slow starter, I think the fact that the language was so interesting and so refreshing that I just kept going with it, and then I just got more hooked into the plot because of that. And then you get attached to Gideon, so
yes, that's true.
Helps you bring you through the book, and it was just like, it was a really fun read. Like, you don't read this book to be like, oh, I'm going to
let me slog through the boring book.
So it's just it's like a fast-paced, fun book.
Definitely. Do you want to talk about the discussion questions really fast that we had going on?
I feel like we went over a lot of them, but we
went over a lot of them. Are you with me where you're probably 6th house, where we're the librarian house, and we should just deal with it?
I want to say probably. I was trying to read through like the different descriptions of the houses just so I could get like a holistic picture, like make my choice, but then I'm probably, like you said, it's where I'll probably end up at, so.
Yeah, Palamedes, the librarian, was one of my favorite characters. So I was like, I have no problem with being Palamedes. Would you be the necromancer or the Cavalier, though?
See, that's where I'm like, probably the Cavalier. Like, it's
you too, huh?
I don't want to. It's just
like it's the bum deal, but.
One thing we didn't mention while we were talking about this book is just the magic. So this necromancy magic is so interesting. Like, I feel like there was like layers under layers that we weren't even just like the characters knew about, but we didn't know about. So it was very complex. Well, in my view, it was very complex, and I thought it was really cool. But at the same time, I don't think I would want to be a necromancer.
I think the 6th house ability is the one that I would want the most. Their necromancy involves touching an object and seeing its history, and like who's interacted with it, who's touched it, which is like a lot less creepy than most of the necromancy you can think of. Like, it's just you can hold an object and be like, hello, why did you borrow my book? So I'm on board with this. But also, I would like to be sword fighty stab. I'm very curious if I'm still team Cavalier instead of necromancer after reading the next book, because I think a large part of why it's so cryptic, what the magic is because we are reading it from absolute normal, no magic at all Gideon, who's just over there like, no, I do not care. I am not here. What you are talking about is the equivalent of calculus to me, and I am falling asleep. I'm going to go stab something, which that does change the perspective a lot. We're looking at it from the Cavaliers the whole time, and the necromancers all just look kind of, you know, mysterious, undernourished and exhausted and neurotic. because we're reading from Gideon, who does more than 100 push-ups a day and then gets mad at herself for being weak and getting tired after the 100th. And I'm just over there like, that sounds like hell. Okay.
A lot of work. No. But yeah, I want to say Cavalier for now.
Okay. And then, who was your favorite minor character? I've already talked up Palamedes a lot. I also like Jean Marie, and I still like Dulcinea, and I'm mad at myself for liking Dulcinea because I don't trust her, but I like her. Okay.
Really interesting character. I want to say like a super minor character, and I think it's just that I'm just interested more in the story behind it, is Emperor, because he keeps getting mentioned, and I'm just like, what is going on? Like the entire time, every time they would mention him, like sometimes you read these sci-fi books with like this religious organization or this like societal organization with an emperor on top, and you can tell it's just like a placeholder for authority, where you just have like, you're never going to meet this person, like it's just an excuse for the way the society is created. But in this case, I kept reading this book and I kept getting the feeling that we would meet him, and then so the fact that we met him at the end, I was like, so I was like, this is a character that I was sort of invested in, even though I never met him throughout this entire book. And so as a minor character, I was like, this person, I'm interested. And as part of like the main crew, I want to say I was kind of interested in how Corona Beth, like I think she was another character that was like I kept noticing, if only because like I think it was probably me kind of wondering how she was fitting into that dynamic with her sister and the sword fighter. And then after you find out her secret, you're like, oh, now it makes sense. And so I think I was watching her knowing that something wasn't quite right. And so I think she is another character that I kind of liked. So
I think I discounted Corona Beth a little too much on my first read until that moment where she attacks Gideon. And it's not even malicious. It's just like, I want a sword fight. And Nabiris is like, no, you don't. And I'm like, all right, now I'm interested. So yes, I hope that we see more on who Corona Beth is and was in the next book, in the next few books. And then
our last question is, are we going to read the sequel? I think it's a resounding yes, we are.
Absolutely. Have already started. It's breaking my brain a little bit, not gonna lie. Like I picked it up and I bought it when it came out, and then I opened it and I was like, no, I'm too stupid to read this right now. There's a plague. I don't have the spare brain cells. I'm sorry, but I'm trying again, and it will happen because I've just been told that, nope, don't wait to understand it. Just buckle up and go, and then come back, and then you'll get it. So we'll see.
No,
So thank you all for tuning in to Reader's Corner. Always a joy and a pleasure. Let's see. We have story time coming up on Monday, if I remember right. Yes?
Yes.
And then we have other virtual programming. There is game night this evening, which is fun. So we're doing library game night. Please be sure to stop by. And what is next month's genre and book?
Next month, I forgot what genre that they picked, but the book is The Mountain Sing, and it's by, I want to say, a Vietnamese author. I can't quite pronounce her name. I would have to look it up.
Mai Phan Nguyen, possibly?
Yeah. Yep, that makes.
So yes.
Yes. So I've heard it's a very good book. I want to say it's sort of historical modern contemporary literature, but definitely tune in for that. Another thing is next month is our annual mini-con. So we've gone virtual with our mini-con the weekend of the 14th and 15th. We're going to have a bunch of different games and panels and like craft videos. So definitely tune in for that. See if there's anything that you like.
Be there, be there, be there. It's going to be good. There's something for everyone.
It's going to be fun. Cool. And then on that note, definitely read Gideon the Ninth. We both enjoyed it a lot, and I hope you guys will too. It's on our Hoopla app as an e-audiobook, so that's definitely an experience. I would say if you're going to read it or listen to it as an e-audiobook, give it a couple, like, because when you start reading it, they do the list of characters, and I want to say that I wanted to put it down when they started listing the characters with all these really long names that were kind of complicated, and I was like, oh no. But you just power through it and just get to the part where
it does that fantasy thing, right? Where it gives you, here's the overview. And so what you do is you're just like, no, I want to get to the story. And you skip to the story and then it's okay.
The overview is always useful when you are in the middle of the book and you forget who everybody is.
Yes, that's where they should put overviews. Honestly, they shouldn't put them at the beginning. They should wait and they should put them in the middle where I'm like, I'm losing track. And they're like, here you go. Would you like an overview? And I'll be like, yes, thank you. Now I want one.
Like a very helpful, like, this might help as you're reading.
Yes, like one of those little picture spreads in the middle of historical books.
I remember. Those are good. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for APL Readers Corner, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right. Happy Friday. Bye, everyone.